Dharma's programs and facilities are supported through your generosity. Thank you for your support. There is a Dharma box for contributions in the kitchen and also a link for contributions on the website.
Thank you everyone for being here today. Wonderful to see you. Just to give a brief overview, I'm going to give an introduction saying what my talk is about. We will watch a short video that Marla will cue up. It's about a 5.5 minute video of Thich Nhat Hanh talking about fear. And that's my theme for today, fear and meeting fear. And I'm taking off from Jessica's talk that she gave last weekend that I found very moving, a talk about using shame as a gateway for practice. And I've been considering ways in which fear can also be a gateway for practice. So I'll talk about that. We'll have a short video, I'll talk some more, and then we'll move toward an activity where we have breakout rooms of three, to the extent it can work out, it'll be 3 people each, and I'll have instructions for what to do then. But part of the breakout activity will be reciting the 5 remembrances, which are, I'll say now, that's on page 40 of the chant book. So for the people who are online, if you have your chant books with you, you'll need those when we get to the activity, page 40. All right, so let me jump in and say, last week, Jessica gave a wonderful talk about shame as a gateway. She talked about how it is that we naturally push away intense experiences, intense, unpleasant experiences that have kind of take us over and require an intense focus that we want to move away from because they remind us of all the things that threaten us, right? So underlying shame and the response to shame, there's a kind of a fear. And it reminds me of something that I've read from one of the sutras. I don't have it in front of me right now, but it is the Buddha saying with an amazing grasp of human psychology that has not been taught since, I don't think. He said, each of us want to continue existing in each moment, and we want to die in each moment. And in particular, that last part, I have had some experience with. I have some sense in my body and my mind of what that's about. And I translate it as to being unwilling or wishing that certain aspects of my mental activity in particular will end, or certain aspects of my physical activity, such as an itch or the desire that I not be bored anymore and that somebody will ring the bell and I can stop sitting here in this unchanging position. Those sorts of things that we desire for parts of our experience to die in each moment. And what is most amazing to me is, having paid attention to this in meditation, I see it actually happens every damn moment. It's like it doesn't go away. It's an auto-renewing function, kind of like breath, kind of like just so many aspects of our experience. And indeed, the breath is a kind of physical expression of what the Buddha was talking about. We take in oxygen, and we can't just take in oxygen once. We have to expel certain things. We have to get things out away from us and no longer in our bodies so that we can renew the breath. Within that simple thing is this profound truth that the Buddha was teaching. So there's fear, different kinds of fear. As you'll hear, Thich Nhat Hanh points to, he has a book about fear and ways to meet fear. And this video that we'll see is a short introduction to that. But he says, when you're born, you experience a kind of primal fear that will stay with you for the rest of your life. You leave your mother's womb, you have to breathe on your own, and you're bombarded with sights and sounds, and you're no longer being cared for in the same way that you were during the months of gestation. And that this stays with us all our lives. And there are, other kinds of fears that come along. I woke up this morning at about 2 o'clock here in Albuquerque, thinking fearfully about something I read yesterday, that the Trump administration has announced that they're going to cut the funding for research hospitals to the indirect funding that they will pay. They're going to cap it at 15%. There's a huge teaching hospital in Albuquerque, the University of New Mexico Hospital, that is contracts existing now to receive 51% indirect funding. So, and I used to work for a university, so I automatically know what indirect funding means. But it is to cover all the expenses. So when there are research grants made to somebody who is in one of these institutions, the university takes part of that money, and it can be 51% is a pretty standard thing for hospitals to support keeping the lights on, and to support the program of training the next generation of doctors, and to provide all the background things that have to happen for the research to go forward. So if the University of New Mexico has its funding suddenly capped at 15%, the indirect costs capped at 15%, it will go out of business. And millions of people who use the hospital will lose access to care. So I woke up scared about that this morning, and had to lie in bed, with the physical effects of that fear coursing through my body. And if you were like me in that kind of situation, you might want to think of ways to get out of it, to have that fear go away, or to distract yourself from it. And I actually picked up my phone and started doing a crossword puzzle to distract myself, which is, that didn't change anything, and so on. And it's an example of something that's pointed to that that Thich Nhat Hanh points to, and that other people I'm going to quote in just a minute point to as well. But just for the kind of primal nature of our experience of fear, I just want to point to a couple more things. First, of course, why is it so strong? Why is it so important to us? It has great survival value. Why is it so distressing? It's because we tend to lose resources when we're in a fearful state. We tend to get cut off from everything that isn't fear, and it takes compassion and patience to realize, one, that we're not alone, two, that we have other resources. And that's what I hope that the activity that we will do later will point to, is those aspects of how to meet fear and bring it into our practice. But first, I want to give a quick quote. There was the Chan master Zhao Zhou, who lived in the 8th century during the Tang dynasty in China, very famous a teacher with many followers. And in his very first talk, this is quoted in the wonderful book called The Garden of Flowers and Weeds by Matthew Sullivan. It's a book of koans. And this is just a side note in the book. It's not among the koans that he focuses on. But he says in his very first talk as abbot of his monastery, when he became abbot, Zhao Zhou announced, "The Buddha is distress. Distress is the Buddha." And a monk comes forward and says, "I don't understand. And Zhao Zhou says, he gives all people distress. The monk says, how can this be avoided? And Zhao Zhou says, to what end is avoidance? So I want to go on from there. So Marla, could you cue up that video from Thich Nhat Hanh?
When we have fear in us, we lose our solidity. We become very weak. We are much less than ourselves when we allow the fear to overwhelm us. The fact is that every time a fear is taking us over, we suffer so much. And we have the impression that we are nothing except fear. And fear is always fear of something. You might be afraid of dying. You might be afraid of becoming nothingness. You might be afraid of going insane. You might be afraid of not being recognized, not being loved. You are afraid of being rejected. And that is why we have to look deeply into the nature of our fear and to see what kind of fear it is. The fear of being rejected, the fear of not being understood, the fear of not being loved, the fear of going insane, the fear of dying, the fear of becoming nothingness. And all of us have that fear. And the degree of fear varies, but it is there. But we also have the seed of non-fear in us, abhaya, non-fear in us. And we should know how to touch that seed of non-fear in us and help us grow so that we can take refuge, we can make use of it. It is like we have the seed of anger in us, but we also have the seed of love and compassion in us. So if one seed is strong, the other seed will be weak. Therefore, cultivating the opposite seed in order to restore the balance is our practice. To deal with fear, you have to make use of your body. Your body plays a role in your fear. Learning to relax, allowing our body to rest is very important. And especially if you know the art of mindful breathing. So the practice of breathing in and out to touch the truth that you are more than your fear is very important. Yes, I have fear within myself, but I also have non-fear within myself. When you have fear, you suffer. And that is why you are afraid of your fear. Fear of fear. You have experienced the suffering of being overwhelmed by fear. That is why you don't want that fear to come back. But if you make a demonstration that just one time that you have the capacity of dealing with your fear, and then you will not be afraid of your fear anymore, because you know that you are capable of handling your fear. So the fear of fear will vanish.
Thank you, Marla. So, Pat Enkyo O'Hara, a teacher in New York City, who was one of the founders of the Buddhist Peace Fellowship and a longtime activist, has a famous phrase that she uses, or that I've seen many quotes of, and it is "turn into the skid." So for somebody who lives in the north, in say Fort Lee, New Jersey, or Minneapolis, or Maine, that's a lot more salient than it might be to us who grew up in Texas, where we don't have icy conditions all the time. Serenity has probably dealt with this plenty too. But what does turn into the skid mean? If you hit a patch of ice and your car starts sliding, don't and you're going to the curb, don't turn away from that. Turn into it and gradually decrease your speed. Try not to panic, gradually decrease your speed. And chances are, it's not guaranteed, but chances are you'll do better than if you make your car immediately spin out and crash. So what she says, that there's a natural tendency in dealing with ourselves and with loved ones to try and make things better, she says. When we're with loved ones and they are suffering, sometimes the worst thing we can do is to try and fix it, to say, okay, here, have this aspirin and you'll be fine. Everything will be fine. Instead, turn into the skid. In dealing with others, acknowledge, oh, that must really hurt. They lost their job. Don't immediately start telling them where they should go look for another job. Stay with the moment. Say, it must feel terrible that you lost your job. We don't want to do this. We want to try and fix things, Pat O'Hara says. We want to be able to say, oh, it's not so bad. Didn't you say you wanted another job? Won't something else come along? We want to soothe ourselves by offering something soothing to another person. She says we also do this with ourselves. If we are feeling very sad, we deny it. But she says that's not a good strategy, as Thich Nhat Hanh just said as well. We can more usefully, more skillfully practice turning into the skid. Then, sometimes in the midst of the worst pain, we'll notice something like a nice breeze or a cool side of the pillow, a reprieve from the fear, or as Thich Nhat Hanh points to, non-fear that's always existing within us, and that we can hold at the same time without turning away from the fear. Being present to suffering is also being present to not suffering. When we numb out from our suffering, we numb out from our experience of joy. So by trying to save ourselves from an experience that is an unpleasant one, we are cutting ourselves off from our resources in a different way, cutting ourselves off from the possibility of joy, which helps us be resourced in the future, to have the actions that we need to take in our daily lives, of actions that produce self-compassion and compassion for others. She says, that's why we train our mind in meditation, to help ourselves and others see that we are alive in each moment. We are complete and perfect just as we are in the midst of our suffering, because we are not just one thing at any given moment. We are fear and we are non-fear. We can experience being cut off and being connected at the same time. And as Thich Nhat Hanh says, if we can focus our minds as an intention toward connecting, that is the way to connect with those parts of ourselves that are not completely locked into the fear, you know. So I hope that makes sense. Stephen Levine, in his wonderful book, A Year to Live, says the same thing. And he points out that practicing in meditation can be a great help in dealing with fear, and that bringing meditative awareness to moments of great fear is also better than avoiding the feelings or numbing out from the feelings. I love this part. In the gymnasium of life, the states of mind around death, which he's talking about as kind of the big fear, are the states of mind around death are a 300-pound weight. Even if you and I attempted with all our might to lift even a few hundred pounds together, we probably would be unsuccessful, and we would become resistant to any further kind of weightlifting. But you and I can work out all day with 5 or 10 pound, even 20-pound weights, gradually building up our strength. We miss our daily opportunities to increase our stamina by overlooking these little workouts that life constantly makes available. The little fears and doubts, the slight angers, the 5 and 10-pound weights of an ordinary day that we do our best to ignore, burying that which might set us free. These lesser pronouncements of heavy states can be accessed, entered, and investigated with some ease without their intensity clouding our awareness. Through exploring these often suppressed feelings we are so proud we can handle, our insight and letting go begins. There's nothing to fear in fear. Enter it. Begin to relate it rather than solely from it. Do not fear fear. Soften that compulsive resistance. Fear of fear is ignorance of fear and ignorance of our other resources. Okay, so here's what we want to do. I want everybody to break into breakout groups of 3, as close to 3 as possible, 2 or 3 if necessary. And it would be for 20 minutes, and that we spend the first part of that 20 minutes, I'd say about 5 minutes, reading the 5 remembrances out loud. And I would suggest maybe each person take a reading. But I want you to do it in a different way. You know how we say the refuges each morning at Appamada? We say, I take refuge in Buddha. And then we say, we take refuge in Buddha. And then we say, all beings take refuge in Buddha. So I would suggest reading them through 3 times, each one person reading them. And you'll have to decide who's who at the beginning. The last one will be difficult. You'll have to do some simultaneous reworking because of the wording. But I want to do it that way too, so that we are using the 5 remembrances as a way of remembering that, you know, not only am I having these experiences, we together are sharing these experiences, and indeed that we share it with all beings, at least all sentient beings. I don't know about rocks, but I know amoebas don't want to die. So do that, and then spend 5 minutes in silent meditation, reflecting on that experience and what comes up for you from it, and then use the rest of the time to share with each other about what came up for you, and, you know, and what you reflected on, and what you might have heard from others as well while you're talking together. And then we'll come back together, and there'll be time for sharing with the group or just closing. Looks like we're all back together. I would like to invite any comments or sharing about what that experience was like. Oh, I see, Rosemary. Thank you for raising your hand.
Hi, Joel. Thank you so much. I wanted to say how rich it is to listen to everyone's take on this. You know, we actually had 4 people in our room, so we had a good variety. And the thing that was, well, I just love the presentation and the non-fear and fear, the balancing. You know, reminding ourselves that we're, you know, that we are not this emotion totally identified, and that we always have, you know, the non-fear. What was comforting as I was reflecting was putting myself and human beings in the natural order of the seasons changing, and
Mm,
that was very, very a very comforting and yeah, a seed, I would say a seed to be cultivated for me. And in our group, one of the other folks was talking about the fear of unnameable things, and that brought something to me very, very early in my life of just, you know, being a child and a lot of instability and what that does to one's body and being. And
mhm,
so there's a lot of emotion that came up by hearing somebody else name the unnameable things. So
mhm.
thank you.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Joel. Beautiful.
Susan and
Oh, okay. Susan, you go, and then Becky, I saw your hand.
Yeah,
Okay,
I
Susan,
just have I just have a question for you, Joel. So
yes.
instead of doing a crossword puzzle, what's the way of turning into the fear for you in that particular situation?
Letting it be as bad as it has to be and not trying to hide from it. And watching, instead of lunging toward a change
Yeah,
to try and end the experience, letting the change unfold, you know, so that I naturally feel the grip of it loosening. During our breakout meeting, um, what I said was the first 3 remembrances I can pretty much hold at bay, you know, that I, they still seem like they're kind of far off, weirdly, sitting here with my creaky knees and my gray hair and, you know, all the frailties I'm now developing. Weirdly, that doesn't slam me the way the 4th one does, that I will lose everybody dear to me. And it was a great comfort to be able to hold that thought with the 2 people I was in my breakout room with. So to know that we are connected is itself a resource. Thank you, Susan. Did that address your question at all? Thank you. And then there was another online hand. So there's Ramona raising her hand.
I just want to thank you for this topic, Joel. And I really felt so validated by the idea that we want to live and want to die in every moment. And sometimes I feel like, you know, I think about dying so much. And so it's just helpful to me to know that other people are there too. Thank you all.
There's so many ways to say that we want to embrace and we want to escape. We want to grasp and we want to push away. But it's not always the death of ego that we're talking about, but just that we're hoping that we can end a certain experience, you know, that we're finding unpleasant, instead of just letting it pass through us. Peg is going to be leading an intensive starting next Sunday. And I know that there's a good group of people signed up. I'm looking forward to being in Austin for it. And the focuses of the intensive, as I have read, are practices to increase joy, which I think of as developing resources in ourselves to meet the situation that we're in. As Trudy talked about in her talk, that we are made for these times. We are the people who are here. We are the Buddhas and ancestors for the people who will come after us. And so we can develop resources, beginning with joy, to help us deal with fear and uncertainty and self-compassion and lots of equanimity, to be able to just sit with what's hard and carefully, joyfully think of what we can do that will be the deeds, that will be our closest companions, that will shape what we do next. I want to tell a story. I won't say anything, but I was talking with a dear friend recently who described a situation where she was engaged with another person in a community, and that the person was very difficult, but that she had always greeted that person, and that the person had begun to respond in a simpler and more reciprocal way, and then had begun, and then another person that she knows had begun to act in the same way that she herself was acting. That is, to reach out to this difficult person in simple greetings and simple ways like that. And again, been responded to. And I was reminded of the wonderful koan involving Yunyan and Dawu, where, what's the one? It's the one where Yunyan says, what does Avoli, what's the deal with Avalokiteshvara, or Kuan Yin? I'll simplify it for myself. Kuan Yin, all those hands, all those eyes, recognizing the cries of the world. And Dawu says, well, it's really easy. It's like reaching for the cool side of your pillow. And Yunyan says, so it's like so Kuan Yin is like covered with hands and eyes. And Dawu, as in these dialogues, getting the last word, says, no, nothing but hands and eyes. But there's a way in which that, he's attributing to this mythical bodhisattva a capacity to go beyond what is humanly possible, to go beyond, into a mystical other space where you can be nothing but receptivity to the cries of the world. But what I understood from the story that was told to me by the Sangha member was that by showing compassion, that you can bring others in, and you are creating the hands and the eyes, or allowing others to join you in creating the hands and eyes, that we are not alone, and that each step that we take to connect makes us less alone and gives the opportunity for freedom and connection to other people. That was a life-changing story. Thank you. So let us say, unless there are other comments, let us say our closing chants.